The talk for this week is 13 take-home points. And this was, I didn't want to go through the whole presentation due to the time constraints today. But this is considering, this was from a talk called Considering the Geomorphic Evidence to Deform the Faith of Natural Channel Design While Cutting Through the Fogs of Uncertainty River Restoration. So a long title, and it was a presentation that we put together back in 2016. So at the end of the talk, the start of the talk is really just focusing on the shared river restoration philosophy, sharing knowledge with humility, having patience and discernment for innovation, advocating excellence, respecting the risk uncertainty of river systems, empowering and challenging and questioning folks, and then documenting from unexpected results. So you'll see this up in the corner of the slides, and this is kind of how each one of these 13 concepts tie back to this philosophy. The presentation outline is, we talked about science versus faith, and we won't go over that today. Geomorphic based natural channel design, which we don't have time to go over that today. And then geomorphic evidence for riverine uncertainties. And then we had 13 take-home points. And that's really what I want to go over today in the talk. Talk about these 13 take-home points. So the first point was, if you don't know Bankful, it used to be that you'd say, if you don't know Bankful, you don't know, and then they'd use a term related to feces that they tell you didn't know much about. And this was helpful in emphasizing the idea of Bankful processy, and that Bankful is really important, and that you can't define a channel off a low flow. So there's value in it, but it also created this idea that Bankful is the flow that you really have to worry about, and the rest of the flows don't matter a whole lot. So one of the things that we started to say is that, you know, there's no such thing as a Bankful call. You can have a call that is depositional, a call that is scour based, and you can have deposition that's lower than Bankful, and sometimes you can have deposition that's higher than Bankful if it's a lag deposit, and you can have scour that's lower than Bankful, and sometimes you're going to have it higher than Bankful. But for the most part, you see your prominent scour as being higher than Bankful, and you see your prominent deposition as being lower than Bankful. So we just have this range of uncertainty. So we started, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago with a friend of mine named Trevor Chandler. He was a geomorphologist, and he never had a course on how to identify Bankful. So he started saying, well, how do you do this? And I realized that, okay, well, he's going to understand scour and deposition. So I worked with Trevor, and we went through it, and we kind of moved away from saying this is exactly where Bankful is. And now we just say, if you don't know Bankful, you have riverine uncertainty. And sometimes we get really close to having our Bankful high or Bankful low, or scour and deposition being the same exact elevation. Other times we get farther away, and that just helps us understand our uncertainty. And when we embrace that uncertainty, we can work that into our design process. So sharing knowledge with humility is not saying, oh, well, I know exactly where Bankful is and you don't. It's saying, I don't really know where Bankful is at either, but these are some things that seem like they should be above Bankful and seem like they should be below Bankful. The next thing is, regional curves and mini curves are great for geomorphic assessment and comparison, but not all are created equal. So we're trying to come up with tools, as we've talked about before, where we can critically analyze a new regional curve and say, okay, well, does this make sense on lines of evidence compared to other regional curves? Or is there something significantly different here that maybe, you know, you just had really young people that were working on this and they didn't understand where Bankful stages were, or they just identified a different depositional surface or a different scour surface. The third one, this one didn't come in too well, I should change the colors on there, is hydraulic geometry. Hydraulic and geomorphic modeling varies based on design and phases and objectives. So as objectives and the design phases change, we should change the level of modeling that we do. Years ago, and I know some people like Mike Adams and Brad Fairley, you've been in this field for a while. And it used to be that you would do a design, and your first iteration of the design, you'd try to run HEC-RAS through that first iteration of design, and you'd spend a whole bunch of time, and you'd be out of budget pretty early in the process because you tried to get enough information together, and then it would get us to a point where we'd go through one design iteration or maybe two design iterations, but we couldn't go through more because we spent so much time trying to model the results when we could look at simple ways of modeling results earlier in the design, and then as we get to later design alternatives, move to more complex ways of modeling the design. Even though some of the designs are easy to model, like a three-dimensional surface, you can run a two-dimensional model, and it's not like after you push the button you can't run it. It just takes a long time to run some of these models. I mean, Luis will tell me about models he's running now where it'll take him half a day or maybe a day longer, or maybe a day at sometimes to run a model. So it's important to choose your hydraulic and geomorphic modeling wisely based on the phases and the objectives. The next one is multi-criteria decisional analysis tool. This is something that Mike Geenan pushed on me years ago coming out of CSU, and he had a teacher that would teach this related to reservoir design for the water resources folks. And we started teaching it because our engineers were so bad at communicating, a lot of the engineers, to clients, that we had a lot of things that people would miss, and clients would be like, well, we wanted you to do it, why didn't you do it this way? And it ended up being that we just didn't understand what they were saying. So we started putting this together to document goals and objectives and say, okay, these are our alternatives and this is why you chose this. And it's just a nice tool to kind of document why we choose something. And of course, MCDA is multi-criteria decisional analysis tool. The fifth point was geomorphic assessment and reference for each comparisons as a comparison on all river systems. So whenever we're doing a river restoration project, it's always important to compare it to a reference condition and look at that existing conditions as well. It doesn't mean we can always fix it, but just to have a comparison of what that reference could be is always going to be important, opposed to, you know, even if you can't fix it, then at least you know what the potential is, and you can say, well, we can't fix it, so we're going to have to concrete the banks. We're going to have to rip-wrap the banks. And that's okay if that meets your goals and objectives and you can't achieve it other ways. But without the geomorphic assessment and reference for each comparison, we never will have a comparison of what it could have been or what we could have restored it to. So we're always going to be, we won't really be able to have a good comparison to explain why we did the project. Design optimizations should be based on the MCDA, multi-criteria decisional analysis tool, and goals and objectives within a geomorphic context. So if we have a design optimization, we're only optimizing it based on the goals and objectives and the MCDA that we have. We're not optimizing it by anything else that comes up. And that was hard for us to get to early, 10 years ago. We wanted to optimize everything based on cut fill. And sometimes we realized that cut fill and the grading was not as important as some of the goals and objectives of these projects. So we're balancing things based on cut fill when some of the other goals and objectives are being ignored because it's easier to balance on cut fill. The seventh one is this idea of a field-based reference shear stress stream power for graded streams. And what this means is that our floodplains can be designed based on vegetative root strength, as long as we know vegetative root strength, but nobody knows those numbers. I mean, Natasha Poland and Andrew Simon years ago put together a paper, Understand the Vegetative Root Strength of Certain Key Species, but that was only a couple species and they still had a high degree of uncertainty. And Teresa Thomas, formerly WIN, had put together this JET test to look at deformation on banks and then what the shear stress was related to that deformation. But even with that, when you back calculate it, the numbers were always significantly different than what would actually be applied in a hydraulic model. So what we started doing a number of years ago through some projects in Medicine Hat, Alberta, with Brad and some others, is we started looking at reference shear stresses and said, let's measure where rack lines are and just look at the ground for deformation. So here's a picture of John Curry, and John Curry's put his finger at the top of a rack line, and on his ground, he's showing that he's in a place where there's not significant deformation. So all that we say is that, okay, at that point, whatever depth of flow it is here, whatever slope the floodplain is, you can calculate a shear stress. That shear stress is causing deformation or isn't, and you can plot that, and that gives us a field-based reference criteria for shear stress and stream power. And then you can use that as empirical data for floodplain design. So then we separate out floodplains and streams and design the floodplain to be separate from the stream design. Now, you still need to use your reference criteria related to floodplains, but your width of your floodplain can change based on the shear stress analysis, and should. Number 8 was flow convergence and divergent ratios are important for all design flows, not only all design flows for geomorphic stability. So you don't design only for the bankful flow, you're designing for a full range of flows, and the width of flows 2 times bankful is going to be significantly wider than the width of the bankful flow, and you have to make sure that the radius of curvatures in the plan form is also different. And then we also talk about horizontal expansion contraction ratios and vertical expansion contraction divergence. Number 9 is the uncertainty of morphological parameters should be observed and understood for all design flows. So we have different morphological parameters, but we should understand how they are related and tie into each other for a range of design flows opposed to just the bankful flow. Number 10 is one of the hardest ones for me to say that I have to really practice at saying a lot. Red Green had put this pretty well and said, guys, it will be okay. It will be okay. It will be okay. But then he still couldn't say, I don't know. The idea is sometimes we just need to say, I don't know. It's going to be okay if we say, I don't know. We just need to say, I don't know. You know, I think of some of the best projects that we've worked on, and they started with this phrase of, I don't know. And then it opens up everybody different, opposed to, oh yeah, we can do this. I've always done this before, and we got all sorts of ideas of how to do this. Sometimes the best thing for us to say is, I don't know. I don't know if blowing up a marsh with explosives is going to get the ecological restoration we want on a anastomosis channel in Klamath, Oregon. I don't know if narrowing up a channel is going to be able to remove habitat for pike, northern pike on the Yampa River, and then increase the biomass of the native, well, actually not even native, the fishery for the Colorado hybrid rainbow trout. Number 11 is list assumptions. And what I said here, both scientific and truth. And what I mean by scientific is, I mean analytical. And then what I mean by faith is these are more empirical data. So a lot of times in science, we have things that are analytical and they really can be defined by a scientific method. And then we have some things that are more analog or more empirical that are great, but they take a level of faith to understand because the scientific method can't be completely applied to them. So there has to be some level of faith assumed with that. But all these assumptions are okay, but we need to list them and list them in a way that encourages people to challenge your assumptions. And that's important. It's going to make us better in the long term, opposed to the alternative of hiding, not listing your assumptions, or making your assumptions with such big words that intimidates people from asking questions. And then the second to last thing is ask others questions and listen. And I heard yesterday, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, but yet most of us talk 2 times the amount that we listen. And it doesn't make sense because we have 2 ears, we only have 1 mouth. We should be listening 2 times the amount that we talk. And a lot of times in river restoration projects, we need to be asking a lot more questions than dictated answers, you know. So we should be constantly finding people to ask questions to. I think of some of the best projects I've worked on. This is Billy Atkinson, who is the designer of the Tailwater Stream Restoration Project on the Yampa River. And this was one of my favorite reaches that I've designed. I think it's 30-some thousand visitors a year, but it was really designed by asking questions to Billy. And then I ended up stamping the project and listening to kind of his response, opposed to me just saying, okay, this is the way that it has to be done, because we didn't know what it had to be done. We were really concerned about fish habitat and reproduction of fish in a place where a lot of the eggs from the fish were decaying on the redds, and due to a high level of nitrogenous waste or poop that were decaying the eggs, so they couldn't hatch. And then the final one is always complete a geomorphic assessment and basis of design report. And this really came as, you know, I went through engineering school and they talk about define your assumptions, but it took a geologist to ask me back in 2009, why don't you write a basis of design memo or a basis of design report for your projects? And that was the first time that I was like, I don't know. And then working with Trevor Chandler, we wrote some basis design reports, and we started to get to a point where we encouraged the writing of a basis design report for all projects. And now we just say, let's always write a basis design report and tie them back to the goals and objectives in our MCDA. So those are 13 points that I figured I'd share with you guys this morning. There's a lot more other important things that go into river restoration projects, but these are kind of 13 points that you're not going to see a whole lot of other places published yet. There's things that have been very helpful to get through kind of the uncertainties and the complexities of river restoration work that are kind of helpful ideas. So with that, does anybody have any thoughts or questions that they want to add? Or does anybody want to add any additional thoughts that like, oh yeah, well, this is something else I really thought was super important? Well, I guess I got them all then. That's perfect. But feel free to kind of add to that. I think there'll probably be a time in the future that we move to, we're working on a website right now, upgrades to the River Shear website, and we're hoping to have that out by the end of August. And I can definitely see some sort of more interactive way of dealing with some of these talks, so that after you get something presented on a Monday morning, you can have comment throughout the week on it. That sometimes, you know, you get approached with a bunch of things early on Monday morning, and you think about them later in the week, and you have questions that come up, but you don't think about them while you're in the thing. So hopefully we kind of come up with better ways of doing that. But like always, feel free to reach out or comments to the group. The calendar invite, if you hit email and the group, you can actually send an email to the group of people that's on the River Shared listserv as well. So if you had a really neat thing to add, feel free to email the group on that. All right. Well, I'll stay on the line. If anybody has any questions or thoughts, you can stay on and ask them. If not, I really appreciate everybody's time today, and I hope you just have a great week, guys.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Brad.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of looking for things to work on this week.
Okay.
I worked on Ralston Creek a little bit on Friday.
Yeah. When are we allowed to start and do the field visit for that?
I think it's next Monday. I think Noah's on vacation this week.
Oh, okay. Good. And are you going out with just Noah, or am I going out with you, or?
Yeah, I don't know yet, but I'm coming in for a site visit. I think next week, possibly.
Okay. Your guys' GPS unit is in in Houston. So do you want to borrow my GPS units?
Yeah, I think so. That's the plan.
Okay, that sounds good. That sounds good. Hey, Jonathan Hinkle, if you're on the line for a little bit, I'd love to talk to you. I went through the one talk that you shared with me. I'd love to kind of have discussions with you if you have a little bit of time.
Yeah, and I got a question for you too, Dave. So
good.
that works.
Cool. So Bissett, yeah. So we today. I mean, I have stuff for you to work on. We don't have the stuff that I'm working on right now is kind of for 5 Smooth Stones, and we're not kind of allowed to have a contract with you for that. So I'm trying to think of what we can get you to work on today. Let's see.
Yeah, I'll send a group email to everybody, and then guess we have calls at not later today too. So
yeah, we have to start some stuff for Vogel Mitigation Bank site in California. So I think you can probably actually start doing some watershed stuff for us for that as well. So basically just get the watershed areas and everything else. Lee has the information on that one. So Vogel is VOGEL, and say, hey, Dave said that maybe I can start put together some basic watershed areas and rainfall totals for the Vogel Mitigation Bank. So that's probably what I'd have you do today. But you'll have to get that information from Lee because we haven't set the website yet. So.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep. And then if I think of anything else, I'll let you know. It's kind of a shame. I got a lot of stuff I'd love to have you help with, but they prefer that I don't have you SWCA work as a subcontractor for me anymore. So maybe I'll have a talk with Lee today about that too, because if you guys are getting slow, then maybe we need to change that for a little while to keep you guys working on some stuff. So also Lake Ralph Hall. I don't have time to kind of look at it today, but later in the week I could get work on that again and have you do some optimization of some of the reaches in a little bit different direction. So after tomorrow, after Wednesday morning, we might have a call about that. We have a design call on Wednesday morning for Lake Ralph Hall, and then maybe I'll get you moving on that in the afternoon. So.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, Dave.
Hey, thank you, Bissett.
All right, bye. Bye.
What's up, buddy?
Hey, not much, man. Hey, I was looking at I listened to Brody. I'm trying to remember what his name was now, but I listened to the talk that you'd given in the Eric Metaxas, and I think that came from you, right?
Right.
Yeah. And what an amazing story of being at the MLK March and meeting a man that had kind of enslaved your family, and the stories of that. That's pretty cool, and kind of going through that. So,
well, and you know, Dave, I guess I have a different opinion than a lot of the talking heads and stuff right now. And you know, when Dr. Botcham made this statement, he said, "Do you want proof that we're all created equal?" He said, as a scientist, you know, that proof and the ability to procreate is kind of showing how a species is connected. And he said, I guarantee in this congregation right here, that male over there can mate with that female, and that male can mate with that female. He said, so last time I checked, we're all created equal. And Dave, I just wish people could see it that way. I mean, to me, I don't care what you look like. If you're a red, white, pink, polka dotted, green, it doesn't matter to me. And I think I wish more people could understand that everybody matters, you know, and go from there. But I don't know. Maybe we'll get there one day.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we get there one day, it's going to be the church that leads us there, right?
Yeah. Well, yes.
You
well,
know,
that or a crack in the eastern sky, one or the other.
That's right. But you know, the one thing that I would say is in listening to him, A black man that's a believer is a significantly different way that we can love that person than a black man that's not a believer. So a black man that's a believer, I think what we can say in truth to him is, hey, you're a loved child of God.
Right.
There is no black, there is no white, there's nothing. You're a loved child of God. It makes no difference. A black person that's not a believer, you can say, well, you're a loved child of God, but their response is going to be, I'm a what? And for us to love those people, it still requires that we listen to them. To me, empathy is so hard because sympathy is easy. Sympathy is like looking, somebody falls in a pit and being like, oh, that pit's really deep over there. Wow, that really seems to be crappy. Man, poor you, and then walk away. Empathy is kind of getting down there in that pit to listen to somebody.
Yeah.
And it's not getting down that pit to stay in that pit with them or make them go down that pit farther, but it's this idea of, hey, I'm getting down there to listen to you. And, you know, I've heard all sorts of things all over the place related to, you know, Black Lives Matter, that it's part of the Frankfurt Institute and it's run by the deep state, and that these people actually hate black people and they're trying to use them as pawns and all this kind of stuff. And you hear crazy stuff, and maybe that's not crazy stuff. Maybe that's true. That I don't really know. But what I do know is that there's a lot of people hurting right now. And just like depression, when people are hurting and they're in this idea of hurting and they're so focused on themselves, it's not healthy. But we need to be there to listen to people, and listen to people as saying, hey, I know that you're hurting, and I understand that you can be hurting, but there's something better than this. And that's kind of what I see with the Black Lives is, okay, so you're so angry. And I mean, you were never enslaved by those people's great-grandparents. But there's something in this world that makes you think that you've gotten less than what you deserve. And you think that this is the reason that things bad are happening to you, when a lot of times it's really not the reason. It's just they think it is. They're trying to make an excuse for themselves.
Yeah. Well, and David, you know, I don't subscribe to a lot of conspiracy theories, but like you just said, I wonder the what if. I mean, you know, when you hear that Bill Gates has got all grades of money tied up into this, and he's going to have some medical tracker injected into the COVID vaccine and all this other good stuff. I mean, there's just all grades of crazy conspiracies out there. But I just wish, Dad's a deacon, and he was at the Baptist convention a couple years ago, and I had a long conversation with Dad, and I said, Dad, I said, one thing that, coming home and being around the smaller church, and Dave, the church I was born and raised in, it does good to have a congregation of 60. I think the record is 125 or something like that. So it's just a small country church. It was started by my great-great-grandfather, and it's just where I was born and raised. And while I was at State, I went to several large churches, the largest being somewhere in the 5,000 with 4 sermons. And so I was having a conversation, and then Dad brought it up to one of the Baptist Association members. And he said, well, Mr. Inkle, he said, Dad's philosophy was, you look at overhead, Dave, and you look at the structure cost and property taxes, and you're paying 5 different preachers. I mean, around my hometown alone, there is 15 Baptist and Free Will Baptist churches in a 10-mile radius. And all of them are the 100, the largest one is maybe 500 people. And so he said, you look at this overhead, you look at how Jesus defined the church and the roles of the elderly and stuff like that. And he said, you know, do we need all these churches in a small footprint? And, you know, the association board member started talking to him, and he said, you know, he said, well, he said, I'm not going to disagree with you. He said, there's good things about mega churches. He said, there's bad things about mega churches. He said, you know, there is, everybody gets to share some of the load. He said, you know, you go to homecoming and you see this at a small church, and you see the same 3 families doing 100% of it, and feeding everybody and carrying all the burden. And he said, in a mega church, that those people can get involved and spread the wealth. He said, but by the same token, you get somebody that just goes through the threshold, sits in the pew, and then walks out the threshold, and they're just there. And he said, Mr. Nichol, I'm going to ask you a question. He said, what are we doing wrong, and what are we missing? Why, no matter how many churches we have, why we got empty pews? He said, and that's the real question. Dad said, you know, I kind of agree with you. He said, you know, we just can't, we've lost the sight. And one of the guys that works with me in this office, he's been on several mission trips, and we had a significant discussion the other day of, you know, on the back of our greenbacks, it says, "In God we trust." And we had kind of a deep conversation during lunch, and he was a fan of taking that off. He said, because in his opinion, it's a lie now. And he said that he thinks that, you know, his education and what he's learned and the missions that he's been involved with, not only overseas, but here locally, that, you know, back in the day when we put that, the United States really felt that in God we trust. And he feels that, you know, 40%, 30%, something like that would actually be the percentage of the United States citizens that actually believe in God. Now, Dave, you know, I don't know whether he's right on the percentage wise. I certainly, I feel terrible if that is truly the case. You know, I think here locally and living in the country, you see a lot more that I would say he's off on that percentage, but I don't know if you move to a larger municipality or something like that, if that percentage is more correct, because I would say it's 80% around here or better. But I just got no clue. So
yeah, the idea of "In God we trust." Do you know when it was put on the dollar?
After World War I, I think.
1956 is when it was put on the dollar.
Right.
So it was after World War II. Do you know when "One Nation Under God" was put into the Pledge of Allegiance?
Was that one after World War I? I knew what.
So
I can't.
That was in 1954.
Okay, both after World War II.
Yeah, both after World War II. World War II was a crazy war. You know, World War I was the war to end all wars.
Correct.
And then World War II came along.
Right.
And up until World War I, they thought, a lot of the Christian thought was that the world's kind of getting better. We were kind of moving in that millennium period that comes up in Revelation.
Right.
And then it got really confusing. And then you had a lot of guys come back from World War II where there's mass destruction. That was the first war where it was just crazy, crazy mass destruction. And you had a lot of people suffering the post-traumatic war, post-traumatic syndromes. And
Right.
then you also had a lot of people that would, you know, you didn't have the same medication. You didn't have the same people that would tell you, hey, you know, things aren't exactly right. And the government was really trying to figure out a way to get people to just kind of be patriotic, because there's a lot of people that became a lot less patriotic after World War II because they went off to war and they're like, oh, this was horrible, you know. And in 1892, the Pledge of Allegiance was created by a former pastor turned politician and writer. And he wasn't a pastor anymore, and he was not really even much of a believer from what most people had said at that time. But he wrote this as a poem contest for the Pledge of Allegiance. And he had it out there for 1892. He did not include God or any reference to God in it because, well, that really wasn't his thing at the time. He was already past that. By 1956, the country wanted some sort of nationalist pride idea.
Right.
And they needed something to pull us back together as a nation so that, you know, we wouldn't have these thoughts that were as individualistic or something above the nation. So either below the nation or above the nation. So that was when Eisenhower decided to put, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God. Just those words, one nation with liberty and justice for all is what it had originally said. But he said that one nation under God. And that's when the churches first allowed the Pledge of Allegiance to be in the public school.
Right.
Before that, the Pledge of Allegiance wasn't allowed in the public school because the churches kept it out. Because the churches said this weird thing: how can you pledge allegiance to a flag? Shouldn't I only be pledging allegiance to God? And there's this whole idea of nationalist pride, and the Quakers, the Methodists, they all said things like, well, why should we put pride into a nation? Shouldn't we put pride only in Christ? And then by 1956, as part of that national pride movement and that part of that nationalist type of movement and trying to get people back into that, they added one nation under God to our bills. That was the first time it was added. And no, sorry, they added in God we trust to our bills. But it wasn't added before that. We had a motto that kind of scarcely came up in some old writings, but it really wasn't anything in the old writings. And it was all in the Latin at the time.
Right.
And then this was the first time they actually put it onto our bills. But it was really this idea of dealing with this loss of hope that the country had after World War II. The hard thing to think of is it's so close, but all of our parents were so young at that time.
Right.
And so like a lot of the people that are boomers right now, they grew up in this idea with this kind of weird way of looking at things because of a Great Depression, followed by the result of the Great Depression was World War II. Right. And then their families came out of this and they were dealing with all sorts of issues, the greatest generation ever, that their kids never understood. Nobody named the generations except for the baby boomers. The baby boomers were the ones that started naming generations. They named the greatest generation ever the generation right before them, which is a great generation they didn't understand at the time. So when we look back at kind of how things are, I agree with your friend. I would love to see in God we trust taken off the money because it's not true. And even if it is true, I don't need my dollar bill to tell me that because I don't worship that dollar bill. When it comes to saying the Pledge of Allegiance, I grew up learning the Pledge of Allegiance and I was very patriotic in my mind related to it. But I will say the Pledge of Allegiance if it causes somebody else to sin by me not saying it. Right. But if I'm in a place where it doesn't cause anybody else to sin, then I will not say the Pledge of Allegiance. There is no way I will say the Pledge of Allegiance in the house of the Lord. Right. And the only reason I say the Pledge of Allegiance in other places is not because I believe it any more or any less, just because if it causes somebody else to sin in anger, then I'll say it because in my heart it means nothing right. to me. And when people say stand or kneel for the national anthem, I won't sing the national anthem anymore unless it causes somebody to sin. But I will stand in reverence and respect for the national anthem and for the pledge as if I am a member from a foreign nation. And I think that's it, because I am a member from a foreign nation. You know, my kingdom's not of this world. So I can stand there in reverence and respect just like I would to listen to O Canada at a Carolina Hurricanes game when, you know, the Maple Leafs come in. And I'm not going to be a jerk when they're singing their national anthem. And so that's kind of the way that I look at it now. It's something that's a change in the worship. Related to the deep state idea and argument, because I know this is something that in Christian circles we hear, and we're always like, well, okay, well what if it is true? What if should always remind us of worship? Whenever we think what if, we should think of worship. Like, for example, when we see the relationship and say, wow, God's given me a relationship with Jonathan Hinkle, and think of all these things that God could be doing through this relationship, right, and how he can make us stronger. And think of those, maybe we go on to some sort of missions trip together. Maybe we do some sort of missional work. Maybe we pull people into the fold and show people Christ. What if we do this? Yeah. At that point, that is a time for worship. And we can say, God, it's so amazing that you could build these relationships, that we could do something like this. It's not a point for us to grab onto it and make it happen. It's a point for us to worship and then be open if it does happen. But generally our plans, once we grab onto God's plans, they become our plans. And we only saw a hint of God's plans. We never know his full plan.
Right.
And that's the same thing with the deep state, which is crazy.
Well, and you know, Dave, on that same line, I can remember my granny, which is Dad's mom. You know, she talked about my great grandparents, and you know, they were my granny was born in 24, so she was only, you know, she was an infant or a wee tyke during the Depression, and my great grandparents were alive when I was born. I remember my great grandma, but not much about my great granddad. He passed when I was 3 or 4, something like that, and you know, Granny talks about when credit cards first come out, and you know, taking a small whatever it is, 2-inch by 2.5 inch, or 1.5 by 2.5 inch, however big they are, and there was a lot of talk in the church, and whether that was the mark of the beast and stuff like that, and you know, now it's like I said a while ago, I've heard it not only on Facebook and some other crazy things. I've heard it in church. I've heard it in Sunday school now, where is the deep state and gates behind some of the mark of the beast and stuff like that. And you know, Dave, I watched a video on the History Channel, and I really wish the History Channel was history instead of I think they're now the Fiction Channel. But anyway, I've probably studied because, you know, from a small church, my poppy, which is Dad's dad, he was my Sunday school teacher through, I would say, middle school and high school, along with my aunt, my dad's sister, and they were big into Revelations. And his Poppy's philosophy on that is, he said, it's the only book that's got a promise. And he said it's within the first 2 verses. He said, and when John wrote it on the Isle of Patmos, he said, you know, he said, imagine that you're John, and you're getting these visions, and you're trying to pin what you're seeing. And it's amazing, Dave, what Poppy told me and taught me growing up, and then this History Channel, and you know, it was Revelations. I would recommend it. It's got a lot of fiction in there. There's a lot of untruths in there, which I have a problem with. But there was one statement in there that the rabbi said, and he said, you know, imagine there was some Apache helicopters flying around, and there was some Abrams tanks, and the guy was looking for, and let me back up just a second, Dave, and I will say that I'm a legalist and a literalist when it comes to some things in the Bible. I don't know why I always I'm that way, but you know, there's part of me that says when it says 666 stepped in the right hand or the forehead, There's part of me that thinks that's really going to be 666 in the right hand or the forehead. There's part of me that says when he's going to crack the eastern sky, I really think he's going to crack the eastern sky. But the rabbi in the History Channel series, he says, imagine you're John, and imagine that you're trying to describe a tank or an Apache helicopter or whatever, and you've never seen these things, and all these are visions to you. How do you describe them? And so I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. I mean, even it says even the sun doesn't know the time nor the hour. So I mean, I think we just have to be ready, and we have to educate those that are lost, and do all we can to mentor and try to live by an example. And Dave, exactly what you said a while ago, whether that's me saying hello to someone as I walk in, or somebody who's struggling. I mean, the other day, one of my guys said, Jonathan, why'd you give that person some money? And Dave, I don't, to me, if I can reach out and be a helping hand, I certainly don't. I don't mind it. I think everything I have in this life is because I'm a very blessed, very, very blessed individual, and it only comes from the man upstairs. And it just amazes me, those that put different things on pedestals, or they have different gods, little g, that they worship, whether it's an Xbox, whether it's the work, whether it's TV or YouTube, or there's so many vices, drugs, whatever. And I've heard a lot of the local politicians fuss back and forth depending on party line, and say, well, it's time to get back in church and forget the mask and stuff like that. And Dave, I'll say that I have some loved ones that they are in the very susceptible type health conditions, lupus, lung problems, those type things. So they really don't need to be around it. And I'm struggling whether you actually have to be cross the church threshold to be worshiping. I think I was in the wrong the other day, because I was cutting grass during worship hour, but I had my headphones on and I was listening to the preacher while I was cutting grass on the farm. And so, I can tell you this, as far as whether I was truly engaged in cutting grass versus listening, I missed a whole patch, and I don't know why, Dave, but I got deep in the message, and I turned around and looked, and it'd been about 15 minutes, and I was on the way to the other side, and I turned around and looked, and I'd missed a whole section of the field. So, whether that was the Holy Spirit, just causing me to listen to the message and not really worry about, I was pushing forward on the throttle, but I don't know that I was really guiding the tractor, if you know what I mean. So.
Well, yeah, let me share something for you yesterday. And this is the first time this has ever happened to me yesterday. We're doing some work in Alabama, and just the way that things worked out, we're trying not to get too many people to travel, and we want some people to help out, and they work regular hour jobs because they have real jobs, but they could come out on the weekend and help out, and their friends that used to work with me. So we were in Alabama, and we were working on a site on Saturday, and my friends, I said, well, guys, if you don't want to take off, if you want to come out later on Sunday, you can. And they're like, no, let's get started early. Well, all the guys kind of canceled out except for one. So yesterday I was out, it's Sunday morning, on the job site, and I was surveying and had about a half-mile walk. So I did the first time I've ever done this is I looked down my phone, and it was at 9:30. Our first service starts at 8:30. So I listened to just got on Facebook Live for the service and kind of listened to it in the middle of walking. I literally got down and started weeping and praying, because of the Holy Spirit getting a hold of me and realizing that, and the pastor said something simple like, just God, thank you for being with us wherever we're at.
Right.
And that's like, as soon as I got on there, I was like, yeah, I've never been in a worship service, but, we prayed for revival as a church. The reason we can't fill our pews is because we haven't been the church.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't need to be filling our pews. Maybe we don't need to have these buildings we have. Maybe we just need to be the church.
Yeah.
And, we have, just this silly, this talk in the mornings is church.
Oh, yeah.
That's being the church. Now, and it's only a short period of time, but you realize every week we generally have a Buddhist, we have a Hindu sometimes, we have a Muslim on the line sometimes, and at times we have communists on the line. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And the one Buddhist that we have on the line, he comes on every single week and he's always there 5 minutes earlier than everybody else.
Wow.
That's amazing to me.
Yeah.
God's going to work through this. God has a big plan. We prayed for something and God shows up and does it. And then we're like, no, not that. That's not what we're comfortable about. Are we chasing comfort or are we chasing Christ?
Yeah. Well, and Dave, you never know. I can't remember if I told you this story or not, but on that same line of thought, you never know who you're reaching either. It's amazing. To me, the devil is always watching, and he can pull some evil strings, but God's also there as well, and sometimes all it is a ray of hope. And there's a story. Dad was on the first row or first pew, and Pastor David motioned for him to come here, and a couple had walked up. And Dave, I'm from the country. And Dad's mom's church now they moved from our home church to a little bit bigger church just because the old church is going by the wayside, I think, and that's unfortunate. But I just think so. There was a big church. It had 10 split offs, and they're just going, or mom and dad are now going to my. I gave you 2 greats a while ago. It's actually the 3rd great that started this one. So they're still within the family church, but it's just the parent one. But Pastor David motioned to Dad, and Dad went up there and he said, Mr. Inkle, can you speak to these individuals? And Dave, they were from communist China, and they had watched the Facebook Live indiscreet for 2.5 years and scraped up enough money to fly to Eastern North Carolina and attend church in person, and were so thankful and just told Dad how much of a blessing that church was, and that they could be worshiping over there in communist China. And so, Dave, you hit a nail on the head. And I'll also say, I don't know where this is going. I don't know where it may end up, but I believe you are correct. And I don't think I've ever told you this, but Poppy, he had endocarcinoma. He passed away in 2001, and about a month and a half before he passed, he told me, he said, never forget your Creator, and never forsake Him, and always do as I've taught you. He said, and my challenge for you, Jonathan, in your life is to figure out the world's water problems, and always try to work in water. And so, Dave, you wonder why I always do what I do, and I'm not sure that I can fulfill Poppy's lifelong pledge to me and his. But I think if I can work on streams, and it's something that I love to do, and reduce TSS and that helps clean up water and steward our waters. I think I'm trying to fulfill what Poppy challenged me to do. But whether it's purchasing a well in Africa so that a tribe has access to drinking water, or whatever, it's something that I think we all need it, and it's why I do what I do, and I think this is just it's amazing. Like minds can be very powerful, and I don't know where this is going, but I'm glad I'm along for the ride, Dave. So, and anything I can do to help, I will definitely help. So,
one last thing I wanted to say, and I've been convicted by this. I've read through a book called Trumpology, Trumpocalypse, and it talks about how Donald Trump may be the kind of call into the apocalypse, and of course it's written by a lot of conservative Christians and numerologists and last time prophecy type of things, end of day prophecies, and related to the idea of the deep state and Hillary Clinton being from the Frankfurt Institute and all these kind of things. Remember, we worship God through love. We worship Satan through hate. The scary thing for us as Christians is we hate those people, and we hate those people because they're not doing what God wants them to do. But we get so angry at them. At that point, we're actually worshiping Satan through hate. We're not worshiping God through hate. And when we being in wonderment of awe, can be in wonderment of awe in love, or can be in wonderment of awe in hate, but it's still worship. So if you're in wonderment and awe of hate, you're still worshiping that thing. So we can be worshiping this idea of the deep state through our hate of it, because we're in awe and wonderment of it. I mean, think about the awe and the wonderment of the deep state, that many people could be in on it and not tell anybody and not gain their own pride or egos. I mean, that's a wonderment and awe. So what I've learned is whatever happens, we know who's going to win.
This is true.
Christ has already won the battle. So we don't need to focus on that. We can focus on what's true and good, because that's what we've been told to focus on. Yeah. And those things that aren't true and good, they may come up, and we may have to live through them, and we may be persecuted because of them, but it's not something that we need to be focused on. And I think every time that we focus on that as Christians, like we have to do some sort of royal defense for God and protect Jesus from the own plan that's already set in place, we kind of make Jesus a lot smaller than what he actually is.
Yes.
I mean,
I'm pretty sure the Battle of Armageddon, we're just going to be wearing white, and I don't think we're going to do anything.
No. We'll have as much impact as Jericho's, as Joshua's armies did, right?
Yes.
We'll have as much impact as Gideon's warriors did. We'll have as much impact. I mean, he doesn't need us. He'll let us be along for the ride.
Because I'm pretty sure it was David and flinging that slingshot, not the and a little pebble. I'm pretty sure it was all the little pebble.
That's right. It's all the little pebble. It never had anything to do with God in this direction or what God did. So, yeah. But no, I mean, we're in such an amazing year. I'm so thankful for this year. This is a weird thing because I will probably not vote for the guy. I'm so thankful for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Because it makes our church have to look at our church differently. Because we see a guy that we know doesn't care about church, but he cares about the power associated with church. And he's telling us, well, go back to church. You should all be able to go. That's essential. But yet, I mean, he doesn't really spend his Sunday mornings in church. So I look at it and say, we've been given this great opportunity right now, and we were created for today in 2020. We weren't created for last year or the year before. I mean, there was a part of us that was there, but we are created. Who we are today is who we were created for in this day.
Yeah.
And the world's only going to know hope, is only going to see joy through us pointing them towards Christ. They're not going to see it through things of this world.
And Dave, on that, kind of on that line, and you know, it amazes me whether, you know, I was in a senior in high school when September the 11th happened, and I can tell you exactly where I was. And it always amazed me, and Dad can tell you where he was in when the Berlin Wall fell, and you know, other trying times in the United States history, and I think we all can, or the Challenger exploded, those type of things, and it all it amazes me that we can be humbled as a nation. And you look at, I mean, I saw the numbers in church on that Sunday after September 11th, and I think that's when we hit our record. And it amazes me that you can get slapped around a little bit, and you can get humbled, and you can then turn back, and you know the roots, and then you'll slowly get, as a nation, I think we slowly turn away, or sometimes it's pretty daggone quick that we turn away. But you know, is this all a test? And you know, like you said, I mean, whether Trump's or Cooper or whoever, I don't care which politician, I don't care which party it is, whether it's in God's plan to slap us around a little bit, and to make us realize that He's in control, and make sure that we're on bended knee. I don't know, but like you said, he wins in the end. So why worry about it, or just try to make sure that we're there, as you said a while ago, for that person in the pit to have empathy, and be that Lyndon, that person to reach out and have a helping hand. And I think that's why we're here, Dave, honestly, is just to mentor, to steward, and to be a witness to others. And I don't know how to, I still struggle with how to do that. I think we all, maybe I'm just not as good at it as others. I think we all have talents, but I think there's some people that are very flamboyant, for the lack of a better term, with their faith. There's others, and they can reach a lot of people. There's other people that can talk and be humble about it, and reach others that are closed, or you know, talk to that Marine on the aisle in Academy Sports or whatever, that's suffering from PTSD, and not you start the conversation by talking about fishing. How the conversation ends up on do you believe Christ died to pay the price on Calvary for your sins? I got no clue, but you know, it's not necessarily being flamboyant about it, and I'm not boasting about that by no means, but it's just it's interesting, the conversations, the walks that we have on a daily basis or weekly basis, whatever. And you know, I think we all fall short, but I don't know, Dave. It's amazing, this journey, and I can only hope that it continues. But then, at the same token, I knew, as Granny told me a couple years ago, that she said, Jonathan, I'm 87 years old. I know where my kids are going to be. I know where my grandkids are going to be. And right now, my great-grandkids are doing pretty good as well. So I've taught well. I know where I'll be. And it hurts to get up in the morning. I wouldn't mind going, she said, but I'll be okay if we all go up in the eastern sky together.
Yeah, that's good.
So, but anyway, well, Dave, it's been good. I'd hate I took up so much of your time, but I definitely love talking to you. So,
hey, Jonathan, these are the important things of the week, man. This is good.
Well, I certainly appreciate all this is going on, and please, if there's anything I can do to help out, if you need a Monday off and you trust me or whatever, you
Oh,
know.
I trust you, man. When you're ready, you let me know. We're
All
fine.
right, buddy.
I don't put them. I don't put together talks until Monday morning. And the reason being is I'm always thinking about things. God puts things on my heart, but I want to be in a point of, hey, you need to do this, God, because I can't. I don't have it figured out. So,
Well,
so if you ever have anything you want to say, as long as it's before 3 a.m. on Monday morning, I'm sure I won't be offended if you say, hey, I want to talk today. We would love to hear from you.
Well, Dave, one thing I've been thinking about, and just because it kind of reared its ugly head, and this switches gears, but it talks more kind of our industry discipline stuff. I'd written all my specs to NCDOT type or special provision type specs, and then I had a client that said, hey, Jonathan, can you switch all these to master spec format? And so it was no problem. And Dave, I certainly don't mind sharing, but one thing on River Shared, if I don't mind sharing, I don't know if other people's do, but I mean, specs, details, stuff like that. If we could have a clearinghouse of not only data sets, but also technical contract type information, I mean, it
That'd be great.
It wouldn't break any copyright laws, because Master Spec has one that if you pay for theirs, you can't put it out on free online and stuff like that. But if it's something that we've written as technical professionals, I mean, put it out as a clearinghouse so that everybody can have access to it. I mean, I also a client the other day, Dave, it's just amazing to me, this industry and the ostrich of sticking their head in the sand. And somebody they requested a log. It was a log vein, which I was proud of, but then they wanted to come back and put platypus dead men and log chains every 12 inches for flotation. And Dave, this is a 10-foot log with a 9-inch depth of flow. I mean, just stuff like that it is just frustrating. But I had to dig up an old detail showing that, and I said, guys, I'm against this wholeheartedly. And they're like, well, we're paying for it, so we're gonna put this in. And Dave, for the life of me, I don't understand. So, but
Well, we would love to hear related to that.
Okay.
Also, if you have a talk related to kind of something for inspiration, just as you go through the week, say, hey, I'd like to give a talk, and be like, oh, sure, this week or next week or whatever week's fine. I mean, we're not very particular. I kind of figure as God puts things on people's hearts, they'll kind of be willing to kind of talk and share. If there's a time that I'm leaving, that's usually when I'll ask somebody, hey, can you give a talk this week? But besides that, I want people to know it's open. But I'd be tickled if, in a year or two down the road, I'd be really tickled if I actually if I end up not giving any talks and other people are giving talks. Now, with that said, one of my gifts is, I consider myself a minister, and I've considered myself a minister for a long time. But I can minister.
You're good at it, Dave. You're good at it.
I can minister to a lot of people. I don't need to just minister here. So if this moves into different people, it's okay. I got plenty of people that I can be ministering to. I mean, my whole life's ministry right now. I mean, everything. That's just who I am.
The one I always like giving, and Dave, I have to go dig it up from time to time, but it's one in Scouts when I was younger. I was supposed to give a 5-minute speech, and for public speaking merit badge. And Dave, 45 minutes later, the pastor come up there and said, all right, Jonathan took his time plus all my time, and he had a pretty good sermon. So, but what I did is I took the 12 Scout laws, and I looked at the biblical relationship to each Scout law as well as I titled it "A Scout Makes a Good Neighbor," and looking at being trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent, and looked at everywhere those 12 attributes come from with biblical ties, and how that, you know, their virtues, and given the current PC climate of scouts, I don't know that it's right, wrong, or indifferent, but I truly believe that those 12 attributes are something that makes a good person. Whether you're a scout or whether you're whatever. Hey, buddy, are those yours, Dave?
No, those are Mr. Justin's. So that's Brantley and Neely. They're Justin Barrett's. Justin Barrett used to work with us in Alabama, and he's a close friend and stuff. And I stayed here last night. He helped survey over the weekend with me. So
gotcha. Well, good talking with you, Dave, and I won't hold you up. And go play with the little ones. That'll be more fun.
Hey, Jonathan, can we pray before you go?
Yeah, I've had it, buddy.
Dear God, thank you so much for Jonathan. Thank you for his heart. Please just convict him with your Holy Spirit over things of this world this week, and just give him strength and courage and boldness to be able to speak into the lives of others. We're so thankful for the opportunity and the relationships and experiences you give us, and the way that you can sharpen us through the lives of others. We're in amazement and we're in wonderment of why you're doing what you're doing and how you're pulling us together. And we're so thankful, and we love you. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Dave.
We'll see you, Jonathan. Have a great day. Thanks, man.
Bye.